There comes a moment in every life when nothing feels like it's moving, where every step feels uncertain, and even breathing feels like effort. It's in those quiet, stretched out seasons that we begin asking the real questions, not just about life, but about ourselves. Why am I here? Why isn't anything working? Is there something wrong with me? These questions don't surface when everything is easy. They emerge in the dark when light seems far, and direction seems vague. But even in that stillness, the truth quietly waits. Things should work. Not in some distant future, not when life aligns perfectly, but regardless of where you are now. The phrase itself is powerful because it speaks to more than hope. It speaks to design. The idea that life, in its rawest and most honest form, is meant to flow, meant to grow, and meant to unfold even if it's currently tangled in pain or confusion. The seasons you don't understand are not accidents. They are layers. And like every strong structure, life is built in stages, many of which are invisible while they're forming. We live in a world that glorifies instant results. But growth, real growth, is often quiet, slow, and difficult to measure in the moment. When you plant a seed, you don't scream at the dirt the next morning asking where the tree is. You water it, you wait, you trust the unseen. And yet, when it comes to ourselves, we lose that patience. We want signs, we want speed, we want reward without the invisible labor. But if we could truly see what's forming within us in the hardest seasons, we would hold on longer. We'd see that the delay isn't denial, it's divine alignment. So often, we believe that something outside us has to shift before things can work. We believe it's the job, the location, the person, the opportunity. But what this book gently reveals is that it's not the outside that dictates our becoming, it's what we choose to do in the middle of what we don't like that writes the next chapter of our story. If things aren't working, it's not because they can't. It may just be that we're still learning how to align with who we really are. There's a powerful difference between quitting and pausing. Quitting says, this will never work. Pausing says, let me realign and come back wiser. The problem is that many people confuse silence for failure. Just because something is quiet doesn't mean it's dead. Some of the deepest transformations happen in silence beneath the surface of what others can see. While the world celebrates the fruit, the process begins in the unseen roots. And that's exactly where life grows strongest, in places no one notices. This book teaches us that no matter where we are, whether in abundance or loss, clarity or confusion, strength or weakness, something can still work for us. But for that to happen, we must be willing to listen to the quiet instructions life gives us when we're still. There's wisdom in the wait, there's power in reflection, and there's transformation in the tension between who we were and who we are becoming. The idea that things should work isn't about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending everything's okay when it's not. It's not about faking strength when you feel empty. It's about knowing, deep within, that there is a divine intelligence woven into every detail of life, even the painful ones. That somehow, the heartbreak is carving room for healing. The setback is teaching resilience. The delay is anchoring you in deeper trust, that everything is still part of it working, just not in the way we expected. Sometimes, it's not that life isn't working, it's that our definition of working needs to change. We think working means constant forward movement, but sometimes life works best in pause, in reset, in reflection, in redirection. What looks like loss could be life removing what was blocking the real blessing. What feels like a closed door could be grace keeping you from what would have broken you. We don't see things clearly when we're hurting. Pain clouds perspective. And that's why we must learn not to make final decisions in temporary emotions. Don't bury your purpose in a season of discouragement. Don't quit on your future just because the present feels confusing. Sometimes, things fall apart not because you failed, but because life is making space for something you would never choose, but deeply need. The book doesn't deny that life gets hard. It fully embraces the storm, but it redefines how we see it. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? It asks, what is this trying to teach me? That shift from blame to learning changes everything. It puts you back in the seat of power, not control over outcomes, but control over your response. And your response is where your true power lives. No one escapes life's friction, but it's in the friction that the future forms. Gold is refined by fire. Diamonds are made under pressure. Seeds break to become trees. So when it feels like things are breaking, you must remember, you're not breaking down, you're breaking open. And what emerges from that is a version of you the world has never seen. You weren't made to stay where you were hurt. You weren't created to live beneath your potential. Even if others can't see it, even if the evidence isn't there yet, you are still worthy of things working. And the more you believe that, the more your actions will begin to reflect it. Because belief drives behavior, and what you consistently believe about yourself creates the framework for your future. People often wait for the circumstances to validate their belief. But the truth is, belief often has to come before the evidence. You don't start walking because the road is already smooth. You start walking because you trust that the road will reveal itself one step at a time. The same way headlights only show you a few feet ahead in the dark, but you keep driving. That's what trust looks like. That's what becoming looks like. You don't need perfect clarity to begin. You just need to begin from where you are. It's okay if you're still scared. It's okay if you're unsure. But what you can't afford is to stay still in something that no longer serves your becoming. Life will always whisper through people, moments, emotions, even disappointments. But if you ignore the whispers long enough, they turn into storms. The whispers weren't punishment, they were guidance. There's no shame in feeling lost. But don't confuse lost with useless. You can be in the middle of nowhere and still be on your way to somewhere. Sometimes life reroutes us for reasons we won't understand until much later. But it always works out when we're willing to grow through what we go through. And that's what this message really offers, a reminder that life is not linear. Success is not overnight. And growth is not always visible. But things are still working even when they look broken. You are still growing even when you feel stuck. And you are still worthy even when your results don't reflect your effort. There's something sacred about the middle, the space between where you started and where you want to be. It's a quiet, frustrating, often invisible place. A place where it feels like time is standing still, where progress is slow, and where you begin to wonder whether the vision you once had was even real. But the middle is where your character is carved. It's where your belief is tested. It's where the work beneath the surface happens, the kind of work that prepares you for what's next. Most people try to rush through the middle. They want answers now, results now, closure now, but growth rarely works that way. In fact, the middle isn't something to escape, it's something to engage with. It's the proving ground of your persistence. It's where you decide whether you'll keep watering the soil, even when the seed shows no sign of sprouting. We often confuse delay with denial, but sometimes the delay is the development. Things take time to mature because you're not just preparing for the destination, you're being prepared to hold it once you arrive. It would be a tragedy to get everything you dreamed of, only to lose it because your character wasn't ready. So instead of cursing the wait, start listening to it. What is it teaching you about patience, about presence, about purpose? Sometimes it's not the goal that needs to change, it's the version of you that's walking toward it. Who you were when you set the dream isn't always the same person who needs to arrive at it. That's why things shift. That's why people leave. That's why plans unravel. Not to punish you, but to make sure you are aligned with what you're asking for. Alignment is everything. You can be in the right place, but with the wrong mindset, and still miss the moment. You can have all the resources, all the talent, all the ideas, but if your belief is fractured, nothing will fully take root. And that's why internal work matters more than anything, because your outer world will always mirror your inner one. If you're filled with doubt, life will reflect doubt. If you're filled with fear, it will find ways to reinforce it. But if you start to shift your inner atmosphere gradually, patiently, lovingly, life will begin to align with that shift. This doesn't mean you won't feel resistance. It doesn't mean things won't go wrong, but it means that you'll face difficulty with different eyes. You'll stop seeing setbacks as proof that nothing's working, and you'll start recognizing them as tools that are refining your clarity. Life has a way of removing what isn't meant to go with you, and sometimes that feels like loss, but in reality, it's grace in disguise. You weren't meant to carry everything. Some weights look noble, but are unnecessary. Some people were only meant to walk a portion of your path. Some plans had to fall through so you could discover a deeper version of yourself. You don't see it now, but one day you'll thank the closed doors, not because they felt good, but because they freed you from a direction that would have cost you your peace. Peace is not just a feeling, it's a strategy. When you prioritize peace, you begin to walk in wisdom. You stop reacting to everything and start responding from a deeper place. You realize that not everything demands your energy, not every conflict deserves a reply, and not every loss is a true defeat. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay grounded in your spirit when everything around you is shaking. This book reminds us that the biggest shifts often happen internally before they show externally. It's not about faking confidence or forcing positivity. It's about creating a new foundation within yourself, a belief system that says, even if I don't see it yet, I trust that something good is forming. Even if I don't understand it now, I know this moment is part of something larger. When you hold that mindset, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start becoming the author of your response. And from that place, everything changes. You begin to see your life not as random chaos, but as sacred choreography, a journey that is unfolding step by step, even if it looks like stillness, a story that's being written, even in the pages you wish you could skip. You are not forgotten. You are not left behind. You are not too late. Even if others are ahead, even if your timeline looks different, life isn't linear, and success doesn't come in one form. Sometimes the greatest achievement is simply surviving what was meant to destroy you. Sometimes the most powerful growth is quiet, personal, and seen. But that doesn't make it any less real. Don't compare your becoming to someone else's highlight reel. You don't know what they had to lose to get there. You don't know what they're carrying behind the scenes. And you don't know how much strength you're building in the shadows while the world looks the other way. There is honor in the hidden seasons. There's purpose in the unseen process. And the more you trust that, the less anxious you'll feel about needing everything to make sense right now. Not everything that's meaningful is measurable. Not everything that's forming has to be visible. Sometimes the most beautiful shifts happen in silence. So, if you're still in the middle, still unsure, still figuring things out, don't rush the process. Don't shame yourself for not being further. Don't let delay convince you that you're disqualified. The journey is still sacred. The path is still working. And you're not behind, you're being built. Even when you don't feel ready, even when the pieces don't make sense, even when the feedback is absent, keep showing up. Not for the outcome, but for the alignment. For the deeper version of you that's rising through the fog. For the clarity that only comes through commitment. For the peace that grows each time you choose to trust the process instead of forcing the pace. Because at the heart of this journey, one truth remains. Things should work. Even here, even now, even when it feels like they're not. Not because life is perfect, but because you're willing to grow, to trust, and to keep moving forward regardless of where you are now. There's something deeply powerful about making a decision that no matter what it looks like right now, you will keep moving. That decision alone, quiet, personal, almost invisible, has the strength to shift your entire trajectory. It's not about pretending that everything is okay. It's about choosing to believe that even in chaos, clarity is being born. That even in the pause, progress is happening. That even in pain, purpose is quietly preparing you. You may not be where you want to be. You may not feel like anything is changing. But what if change isn't about the outside first? What if it's about how you think, how you see, how you respond? What if your future is waiting for your perspective to shift before it unfolds? We spend so much time wishing the outer conditions would get better, if the job would improve, if the relationship would stabilize, if the opportunities would finally open. But the outer world often bends when the inner world aligns. When your beliefs, your words, your actions, and your energy are in harmony, things begin to move. Not always instantly, but always intentionally. This isn't about control. This is about co-creation. You're not forcing life, you're flowing with it. You're learning to listen. You're learning to trust. You're learning to become the kind of person that life can trust with the next level. And that kind of trust can only be built through process, through time, through tears, through tests. There is no shortcut for becoming. There is no fast track for depth. The real growth always happens in the stretch, when you stay in something in after the excitement has faded, when you keep showing up even after results seem invisible. That's where strength forms. That's where identity matures. That's where confidence grows, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't beg for approval. The kind that knows, I've come too far to go back. Every time you keep going when quitting looks easier, you are building emotional equity. Every time you choose patience when anger tempts you, you are strengthening your peace. Every time you forgive when resentment feels justified, you're freeing yourself. And every time you believe again, even after disappointment, you are reclaiming your future. This is not about perfection. This is about persistence with grace. You don't have to get everything right. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just need to be willing to keep showing up for your own life. To stop waiting for someone else to rescue you. 2. Stop looking outside for what only the inside can sustain. Because no external breakthrough can make up for internal burnout. And no amount of success will feel like enough if your soul is starving for alignment. That's what this book invites you to consider. What does it look like to align before you arrive? To become before you are celebrated? To heal before you are seen? Sometimes, we ask for new levels, but we haven't yet outgrown the mindset of the last one. We ask for big opportunities, but carry old insecurities. And life, in its wisdom, doesn't withhold those things as punishment, but as preparation. When you're ready on the inside, things begin to open on the outside. Not because life suddenly got easier, but because you got deeper. You stopped needing constant validation. You stopped trying to outrun discomfort. You started owning your voice, standing in your worth, and trusting your inner rhythm. And from that place, things begin to work, not perfectly, but purposefully. And still, the hardest part sometimes isn't the effort, it's the waiting. Waiting for change, for answers, for momentum. But what if the waiting isn't wasting? What if it's weaving? What if it's life pulling together everything you'll need for what you asked for, but just not in the way you imagined? Waiting will always test your trust. It will challenge your identity. It will confront your fears. But if you stay long enough, you'll see that the delay didn't take from you, it trained you. It taught you what really matters. It showed you what you're made of. It stripped away the noise and brought you face to face with the parts of yourself that needed love, not judgment. That's where the true transformation happens, in the space between your plans and your purpose. In the detour that humbled you. In the disappointment that softened you. In the stillness that reminded you who you are. Without the applause. All of it matters. All of it is working. You may be in a place right now where you're questioning everything. You've done the inner work. You've prayed, cried, journaled, spoken affirmations. And still things feel unclear. But clarity is not always instant. It often comes in layers, like a fog that gradually lifts. And in the meantime, your job isn't to rush the fog away. It's to keep walking in faith. Even when visibility is low, you'll be tempted to stop, to settle, to shrink, to go back to what's familiar. But don't. Because you're being stretched for a reason. You're being expanded for a purpose. And the discomfort is not evidence that you're off track, it's a sign that you're growing. And growth always feels like resistance at first. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because it hurts doesn't mean it's over. Sometimes, the deepest breakthroughs come after the longest silence. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters begin with the most painful endings. You may not be able to see how yet, but things should work. Not because everything is in place, but because you've decided not to give up here. So take a breath. Ground yourself in the present. Remind yourself of how far you've come, not just in miles, but in maturity. You're not the same person you were when this journey began. You've grown in ways you can't even see. And every lesson, every loss, every lonely night was not wasted, it was building something inside of you. Let that truth settle in. Let it anchor you. Let it remind you that you are still on your way. Even if you don't know exactly where it leads. Because life doesn't demand that you know the full map, only that you trust the next step. And the next. And the next. Keep walking, keep believing, keep becoming, because even now, even here, things should work. There's a quiet kind of courage that doesn't show up on stages or in highlight reels. It's the kind of courage that gets out of bed when everything feels heavy. That shows up to life when the heart is tired. That chooses to keep breathing, keep trying, and keep believing in something better despite the odds. That's the courage that truly changes lives. And that's the kind of courage this book invites you to honor within yourself. We often think progress has to be big and visible. That transformation needs to be loud and dramatic. But more often, it's subtle, invisible, gentle, like a small shift in the way you speak to yourself, like choosing grace instead of shame, like making one healthier choice today, not because you've mastered everything, but because you've started to believe you deserve better. You won't always feel strong. You won't always feel certain. You won't always feel inspired. But strength isn't the absence of struggle, it's the decision to move forward in the presence of it. You don't need to be fearless. You need to be faithful to the path, to the process, to the quiet wisdom within you that says, keep going. This matters. And here's something we rarely talk about. Sometimes, what's not working is actually protecting you. We cry over missed opportunities, failed plans, closed doors, but we don't always realize that the delay could be life's redirection. What if that thing you wanted wasn't just wrong for you, but too small for you? What if the no was really not yet, or not this, there's something better? But better doesn't always come dressed the way we expect. Sometimes it arrives looking like loss, like discomfort, like starting over. And it's only when you look back later that you realize that heartbreak led to healing, that setback led to your spiritual awakening, that ending brought you home to yourself. There's a beautiful and often painful truth in this book. You cannot build a future while clinging to what's trying to leave. And that includes old versions of yourself. Sometimes it's not the job, the person, or the environment that's holding you back. Sometimes it's the inner narrative, the story that says, you're not good enough. You always mess things up. You'll never make it out of this. That story is not truth. That story is a wound. And it's okay that you've carried it. But now, it's time to rewrite it. You're not here to repeat cycles. You're here to rise from them. You're here to step out of survival mode and into stability, into wholeness, into joy that's not dependent on perfection. That's the invitation this book gives, to live in alignment with your worth, not your wounds. But that kind of alignment requires honesty, radical honesty, the kind that looks at your patterns without shame, the kind that says, I see where I've been stuck, I see what I've tolerated, I see how I've abandoned myself for the comfort of others, and now choose differently, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers, in spirals. You'll think you've moved on, and then a familiar feeling returns. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're deepening. It means another layer is ready to be released. And each time you choose compassion over condemnation, you heal something within. You'll start to notice small signs that things are shifting. Not big miracles, but tiny moments of peace where there used to be panic. A clear boundary where there used to be confusion. A pause before reacting. A moment of choosing to rest without guilt. These are not small things. These are sacred victories. Evidence that things are working, even if it's not loud yet. And eventually, you begin to embody a new energy. One that says, I'm no longer available for what drains me. I'm no longer addicted to struggle. I'm allowed to experience ease. I'm allowed to receive good things not because I've earned them, but because I've unlearned the idea that I must suffer to deserve. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before life taught you to shrink, before you were told you had to prove yourself to belong, before you were conditioned to chase worth through performance. The truth is, you've always been enough, always been valuable, always been worthy of things work in, not because of what you do, but because of who you are at your core. From this space of self-awareness and compassion, new doors begin to open. Not forced, just found. Not chased, just aligned. Because when your inner world softens, your outer world begins to respond. And what used to feel impossible begins to unfold gently, not all at once, but step by step. Don't let impatience rob you of joy. Life isn't a race. You don't need to catch up to anyone. You're not late. You're right on time for your unique path. And what's meant for you is not in competition with what's meant for someone else. Your journey is sacred. It is yours. And it's unfolding at the speed of your healing, even when it feels quiet. Even when it feels like nothing's moving. Things are working inside you, around you, through you. And the more you anchor in that truth, the more peace you begin to feel, not because everything is solved, but because you're learning to trust the unfolding. And that trust, over time, becomes your foundation. The kind of foundation that doesn't collapse in storms. The kind of strength that doesn't require performance. The kind of faith that isn't shaken by delay. It's a quiet knowing, a rooted confidence that says, this may not look like I imagined, but it is still good. It is still working, and I'm still on the right path. Because even now, regardless of where you are, things should work. Not because of certainty, but because of faith. Not because you have proof, but because you've decided that this moment is not the end. That you're still becoming. That something greater is forming. And that your story in now is far from over. There's something deeply human about wanting answers. We want to know where we're headed, why things happen the way they did, when change will come, and how we'll make it through. But life isn't always linear. It rarely hands us the full map in advance. Instead, it offers glimpses, clues, subtle invitations to trust what we cannot yet see. That's not punishment, it's preparation. You see, if we knew everything ahead of time, we'd try to control the process. We'd resist the unknown. We'd avoid the detours. But it's often the detours that shape us. It's the unexpected curves, the closed doors, the heartbreaks, and the delays that awaken something within us we didn't know we needed. That's the part of the journey that feels most uncomfortable, but also the part that transforms us the most. In the moments where things feel like they're falling apart, the temptation is to panic, to retreat, to assume we've made a wrong turn. But sometimes, falling apart is just the beginning of falling into place. You have to let the old crumble to make space for the new. And that crumbling is often uncomfortable, disorienting, even painful, but it's part of the process. A sacred shedding. You are not being punished when things shift. You are being positioned. Not everything breaking means something is wrong. Sometimes, it means the foundation wasn't strong enough to hold what's next. Sometimes the job, the relationship, the belief system, or the version of you that got you here isn't equipped to carry what's coming. And so, things rearrange. They break so they can be rebuilt stronger. That's why surrender is such a powerful lesson in this book. Not giving up, but letting go. Surrendering the need to control every outcome. Surrendering the idea that things must unfold exactly as you imagine. Surrendering your timeline. Surrendering your attachment to how it should look, so you can open your hands to how it's meant to feel. There's a strange kind of freedom in surrender. At first, it feels like loss, like you've dropped everything. But slowly, you begin to realize that what fell was never meant to stay. And what remains, what still calls to your spirit, is what was truly yours all along. Surrender strips away the noise. It brings you back to essence, to center, to clarity. And from that space, you begin to rebuild not just a life, but a mindset, a new way of seeing, a new way of responding, a new way of choosing what you allow, what you accept, what you chase, and what you release. You begin to reclaim your personal power, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that governs yourself with love, with dignity, with truth. And you start to realize that your life does not have to look like anyone else's in order to be valid. That your process doesn't need to match the pace of others to be meaningful. That your becoming is sacred, whether it's loud or quiet, fast or slow, seen or unseen. The value is in the truth of it, not the visibility. You also begin to see that healing is not about going back to who you were before things hurt. It's about becoming someone wiser because of it. Stronger, softer, more discerning, more compassionate. Not in spite of the pain, but through it. That pain, while not chosen, was also not wasted. It deepened you. It peeled back the layers. It forced you to see what really matters. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens one choice at a time. Choosing stillness over panic. Choosing rest over performance. Choosing honesty over pretending. Choosing peace over people-pleasing. Choosing to believe, even on days when doubt feels louder. These are quiet, powerful revolutions. And over time, they change everything. You might not be able to explain it to others. You might not be able to prove your progress on paper, but something inside you knows it's working. You're not who you used to be. And while you're not where you want to be yet, you're on your way. Not because of signs, but because of alignment. Because you're no longer betraying yourself just to fit in. Because you're choosing growth over comfort, truth over image, integrity over applause. And even if the external hasn't caught up yet, the inner foundation is being laid. That's what makes the difference. That's what shifts your reality, not the outer conditions changing first, but your inner commitment to your becoming. So if you're still waiting, still wondering, still healing, take heart. The waiting is not a waste. The wondering is not a weakness. The healing is not a delay. It's all part of the unfolding. It's all part of the quiet work that strengthens you, stretches you, and readies you for what you prayed for. And slowly, what once felt heavy begins to feel lighter. Not because everything's solved, but because you're no longer carrying it alone. Because you've made space for surrender, for softness, for grace. And because you've allowed yourself to believe that even here, even now, things can still work. Sometimes, the most powerful shift doesn't come from changing your life, it comes from changing how you see your life. Not every problem needs solving. Some just need seeing. Some wounds don't need fixing, they need feeling. And some seasons aren't about striving, they're about listening to what your heart is whispering, listening to what your patterns are trying to teach you, listening to the quiet voice that says, you don't need to do more to be more. You're already enough. That's a truth many of us spend years trying to believe. Because the world has taught us to measure our value by productivity, but your soul was never created to hustle for its worth. You were designed for balance, for flow, for alignment. And when you stop chasing the image and start honoring your inner truth, life begins to move differently. Things begin to shift, not overnight, but undeniably. Doors begin to open where there were only walls. Peace begins to fill the places where anxiety once ruled. You start to feel safe in your own presence, even if the world is chaotic. But to arrive at that space, something must be released. The need to be constantly certain. The need to have all the answers before you begin. The need to fix everything immediately. Some of the greatest growth you'll ever experience will happen when you don't know exactly what comes next, but you trust yourself to face it anyway. Trusting yourself doesn't mean you won't make mistakes. It means you've decided that you can handle whatever comes because you've survived so much already. You've walked through heartbreak, confusion, failure, fear, and you're still here, still breathing, still becoming. That is proof enough. This book reminds you that even if you can't control the circumstances, you can choose the meaning you give them. That shift alone can rewrite your entire story. You are not what happened to you. You are not the delay. You are not the diagnosis, the debt, the disappointment. You are the one who is rising through it, who is still holding space for hope, even if hope feels small, who is rebuilding something sacred from the scattered pieces. Healing doesn't make you weak. Grieving doesn't make you broken. Taking a break doesn't mean you failed. All of these are part of the process. And the more you allow yourself to be human, to feel, to fall, to get back up, the more you realize that things aren't falling apart. They're falling into deeper meaning. There's a season for pushing, for working hard, for chasing goals. But there's also a season for stillness, for silence, for surrender. And if you don't honor that rhythm, you burn out. You lose connection to your own spirit. And eventually, nothing works because you're not working. That's the deeper wisdom this journey offers. Your alignment is more important than your achievement. You can have all the right metrics, followers, finances, or fame, but if your soul is restless, none of it will feel like enough. You can chase every milestone and still feel lost. But when you start from peace, Everything else you build stands on solid ground. So let this part of your journey be about building something different, not something that looks impressive, but something that feels honest, not something that performs well for others, but something that speaks peace to your own heart, because that's what truly works, not perfection, but presence. There's beauty in small beginnings, in slow healing, in uncertain starts. You don't need a massive breakthrough to validate your becoming. Sometimes, just waking up with a softer heart is a victory. Choosing compassion when you're frustrated is a breakthrough. Taking a walk instead of spiraling is success. These little shifts, they're the foundation of something big. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are not failing. You are transitioning out of old patterns, out of fear-based living, out of self-abandonment, and into trust, into peace, into purpose. That doesn't rely on performance. You may not be able to explain it, but something inside you knows you are finally coming home to yourself. Let that be enough right now. Let presence be your power. Let stillness be your strength. Let now be enough. Not because it's perfect, but because you're present. And in presence, things begin to realign. Not with force, but with flow. Not with panic, but with peace. You can live from that space. You can create from that space. You can rebuild, reconnect, and realign from that space. And the more you do, the more you'll begin to see the evidence. Things are working quietly, slowly, surely, not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting yourself. This is not about winning the world's race. This is about finally feeling whole in your own space. Whole, not because everything's done, but because you no longer need to rush through life to feel worthy. You are already enough. You are already worthy. You are already becoming even now. It's easy to forget that life moves in seasons, that just as the earth cycles through birth, growth, decay, and rest, our inner world does too. But we live in a culture that worships productivity and visibility. We're praised for blooming, but rarely for becoming. We admire the harvest, but overlook the soil. Yet without rest, without pruning, without quiet, nothing strong can grow. You don't have to be in constant motion for your life to matter. Some of the most powerful growth happens when nothing seems visible. In the silence, in the stillness, in the gentle letting go. There's sacred work being done when you rest, when you stop proving, when you stop pushing just to keep up. And in that space, you begin to remember you were never created to be a machine. You were made to be whole. Wholeness isn't about having everything together. It's about making peace with where you are, even if it's unfinished, even if it's messy, even if it doesn't look like anyone else's journey. Because this moment, however imperfect, still holds power, still holds beauty, still holds potential. You don't have to escape it. You just have to be present enough to meet it. And maybe that's the true invitation of this message, not to escape your life, but to enter it more deeply, to bring your awareness fully into the now, to stop waiting for some perfect moment when everything clicks, and instead trust that this right here is the moment that's shaping you. It's not easy. Presence takes courage, especially when the present moment is confusing or painful. But when you sit with it, when you stop running, you realize something. It doesn't break you. You can hold discomfort without drowning in it. You can feel sadness without being swallowed by it. You can walk through uncertainty and still be grounded in peace. Because you're not your emotions. You're the one witnessing them. You're not your circumstances. You're the one moving through them. You're not your past. You're the one choosing your future moment by moment, belief by belief. That's where power returns. Not through control, but through clarity. You don't need to have the whole plan figured out. You just need to get honest about what you're no longer willing to carry, the stories that no longer fit, the expectations that no longer serve, the survival patterns that once protected you, but now only limit you. There comes a time when you realize you're not broken. You're just outgrowing who you used to be. And it's uncomfortable. The shell you lived in no longer fits. The relationships that once felt safe begin to feel tight. The habits you used to lean on begin to feel heavy. But this isn't a crisis. It's an awakening. And that awakening leads you inward, not to isolate, but to integrate. You begin to gather the parts of yourself you once silenced, the younger self you ignored, the needs you denied, the voice you quieted for the comfort of others. You begin to bring all of you back home, not with shame, but with compassion. This book gently reminds you that you don't need to fight yourself to evolve. You need to embrace yourself, because you can't shame your way into transformation. You can't hate your past into healing. You must lead with love, even when it's messy, even when it's slow, especially when it's slow. There is divine timing in your growth. There's a reason certain things haven't happened yet. A reason certain doors are still closed. You may not see it now, but in time, you'll understand. Delayed does not mean denied. Stillness does not mean stuck. You are being guided, protected, refined. And if you can sit in the unknown long enough, something beautiful happens. Clarity begins to rise, not from outside, but from within. You stop needing the world's permission to believe in yourself. You stop needing everything to go right in order to feel worthy. You begin to root your faith, not in results, but in resilience. Resilience is not about pushing through without feeling. It's about staying connected to your truth, even when everything around you wavers. It's about holding space for joy and grief, for loss and hope, for waiting and moving. It's about being honest with yourself without abandoning yourself. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to slow down. And you are still worthy of things working even in the pause. Especially in the pause. Because what's forming in you now is not just a new result. It's a new way of living. A new relationship with yourself. A new story. And that story doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to impress anyone. It just needs to be true. True to your healing. True to your vision. True to your voice. And when you live from that place authentically, humbly, powerfully, life begins to meet you there. Because that's where things truly begin to work. Somewhere along the way, you begin to realize that peace isn't found in the absence of problems, it's found in your relationship with them. When you no longer let every challenge define your worth. When you stop letting every delay question your direction. When you no longer collapse just because something didn't go your way. That's not indifference. That's emotional maturity, and it changes everything. Life was never meant to be one constant, upward line. There will be setbacks. Things will end. Expectations won't always be met. But that doesn't mean things aren't working. Sometimes, the very event you thought was the worst thing to happen to you becomes the reason you finally woke up, became honest, became brave, became whole. This is the paradox that wisdom lives in. You can feel grief and still grow. You can be confused and still aligned. You can walk through uncertainty and still be safe. That's what this journey is about. It's not avoiding discomfort, but learning to carry it without losing yourself in the weight of it. And there's something remarkable about discovering that you're not as fragile as you once believed. You begin to see that you've lived through things you once thought would break you. You've kept going on days when your spirit was tired. And slowly, the stories that once held you hostage begin to loosen their grip. You're no longer asking life, why me? You're asking, what now? What can this teach me? How do I grow from here? That's the quiet shift from victimhood to authorship. And it doesn't mean the pain didn't matter. It means you've chosen to reclaim your power not through control, but through awareness, through grace, through a belief that you're still worthy of good. No matter what's happened, sometimes healing feels like starting over, like returning to simplicity, to breath, to silence, to grounding, because healing isn't always loud or Instagrammable. Often, it's unseen. A decision to go to bed early instead of escaping into distraction. A moment of self-forgiveness. A deep breath instead of a harsh reaction. And each time you choose love over fear, quietly, you rebuild the foundation. This foundation becomes your quiet strength. It gives you room to grow into your life, not just survive it. And when things don't go according to plan, you don't spiral, you pause. You feel, you listen, and you ask the wiser question, what is life asking of me now? Because life will keep evolving, and you must evolve with it. Who you were yesterday won't always fit who you need to become tomorrow. This is not failure. This is transformation, and it will require release. The release of expectations, of attachments, of identities that are no longer true. And it will also require trust, not in perfect outcomes, but in your own becoming. Trust that even if you don't know what's next, you'll be able to meet it with clarity. That even if things fall apart again, you now have the tools to build back better. Not just stronger, but softer, more whole, more you. And here's the powerful part. When you stop resisting where you are, something in your life starts to breathe again. The tension softens, the panic quiets, the pressure fades, because you're no longer trying to perform your healing, you're simply living it, with presence, with courage, with grace. Let yourself be surprised by how much can change when you stop forcing. Let yourself be humbled by how often peace shows up when you finally stop running. Let yourself be open not to perfection, but to presence. Because presence is where everything begins to realign. Not because life changed, but because you did. And what begins to happen is not loud. It's not always fast, but it's real, it's sustainable, and it's yours. You begin to trust your timing. You begin to hold yourself gently. You begin to breathe deeper, not because you've arrived, but because you're no longer fighting the moment. You're in it, with all of yourself, with all of your faith. And that is where things begin to truly work. There is a profound peace that comes when you stop needing life to match your plans in order to feel safe. When you no longer measure your hope by how well things are going. When you no longer allow outcomes to dictate your identity. That peace doesn't come from the world. It comes from within, from presence, from choosing to be fully alive in this moment, whatever it holds. There's no formula for that kind of trust. It's built slowly, through surrender, through letting life teach you softly or suddenly how to hold space for mystery, for what you cannot fix, for what you cannot predict, and most importantly, for what you still hope for in after. Being disappointed.it is this space between loss and hope, between waiting and arrival that becomes sacred ground. It's where your faith is shaped, not just by what you say you believe, but by how you show up when nothing makes sense. It's where you begin to walk, not by sight, but by something deeper, a knowing, a whisper, a resilience that says, even here, I will not give up on myself. You don't need all the answers to move forward. You need only to stay open, to stay rooted, to stay faithful to your truth, even when no one claps for it, even when no one sees it. Because real growth often happens in silence, in solitude, in the privacy of your own soul. And from that place, you stop chasing what was never meant for you. You stop begging for the validation that once kept you trapped. You stop compromising your peace just to belong. And in that release, you find something you didn't know you were missing: your power. Not power that dominates, not power that performs, but power that aligns, that listens, that leads with love. The kind of power that's not afraid to say no, to let go, to rest. The kind of power that doesn't need to control people or timelines, because it's anchored in something deeper than ego. It's anchored in truth. This kind of truth doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. And the more you live from that space, the more you notice a shift, not just in what you do, but in how you are. You become quieter, but more certain, softer, but more clear. You're no longer reacting, you're responding. No longer rushing, you're trusting. And this trust becomes the soil for all that will bloom next. You're not forcing growth, you're allowing it. You're not manufacturing miracles, you're noticing them. In the small moments, in the slow days, in the gentle realizations that things really are moving, even if you can't yet see the full picture. What once felt like resistance becomes rhythm. What once felt like confusion becomes clarity. And what once felt like delay begins to feel like divine protection. Because you now understand it wasn't supposed to happen then. Not because you weren't worthy, but because you weren't ready. And readiness has less to do with what you can prove and more to do with what you can hold. Can you hold peace in chaos? Can you hold love after loss? Can you hold vision without seeing results? That is the work. That is the path. And when you can, life starts to trust you back. Not because you've passed some test, but because you've become someone different. Someone anchored, someone wise, someone whole. And from that place, yes, even now, things begin to work. Maybe, After everything, you're not looking for answers anymore. Maybe you're just looking for peace. A peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. A peace that isn't delayed by what hasn't yet arrived. A peace that welcomes you fully as you are without needing you to change a thing first. That kind of peace cannot be earned. It's not the reward for doing everything right. It's the birthright of simply being human. And yet, we forget. We believe we must hustle, prove, perform, push. But life, real life, soul life is asking for something else. It's asking you to rest, to breathe, to return. Return to the core of who you are, beneath the fear, beneath the conditioning, beneath the noise. Return to the knowing that you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not defined by what didn't work. You are a living, unfolding story, and the page you're on now is not the last one. This isn't where you stop. This is where you learn how to stay present in the in-between. The place where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. And that's okay. That's where the deeper work happens. Where strength is forged. Where identity is refined. Where you learn to live, not in perfection, but in presence. Presence changes everything. When you stop rehearsing the past or predicting the future, and simply meet the now, you realize this moment is enough. That you are enough. That your breath, your body, your spirit all here, all now is a miracle in motion. And when you stop long enough to honor that, the world shifts. Not always outside, but inside. And from the inside, things begin to reorder. You speak to yourself with more kindness. You walk through your days with more intention. You release old burdens. You make room for beauty again. You soften. You forgive. You trust. Trust not because everything is easy, but because you know that you are no longer alone within yourself, that your own presence is now a safe place. And from that inner safety, miracles are born, not always flashy, but always meaningful. The job, the relationship, the healing, the opportunity, they will come, but they will come into a soul that is ready to receive them, that no longer needs them to feel whole, that welcomes them with gratitude, not desperation. And that's the shift. That's when things begin to truly work, because things don't work just because they look good. They work because they feel right. They align. They resonate. They bring peace instead of pressure, flow instead of friction, joy instead of performance. And when your life begins to reflect the truth of your healing, no longer needs to be perfect, it just needs to be yours. So if you find yourself in the middle, in the stretch, in the quiet, in the wait, remember this: nothing is wasted. Not a moment, not a tear, not a single breath. Everything has been a thread in the tapestry of your becoming. And though you can't always see the pattern yet, it's forming. With wisdom, with purpose, with grace. You don't have to chase what's meant for you. You don't have to fear missing it. When you are aligned, when you are anchored, what's meant for you will come. Not because you forced it, but because you became someone who could hold it well. So breathe, trust, and take the next step. Even if it's small, even if it's quiet, even if no one sees it but you. Because your healing matters, your becoming matters, and your life exactly as it is still holds the potential to unfold beautifully. Regardless of where you are now, things should work,